Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm Devin Thorpe, your host, and excited to have with us today. Well, we're doing the show for Forbes today because I'm a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing, and we are excited to have with us today Robert Foster, who is the executive director of the Aspen Institute's program called Accelerating Market-Driven Partnerships, or AMP. Robert, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Devin.
Well, we're excited to talk about the great work that you're doing to end global warming, to accelerate a reduction in carbon emissions. So tell us a little bit about your program, its genesis, and what you're doing.
We had the good fortune to be launched by Secretary Clinton when she was running the State Department 2 years ago. And with the convening power of the State Department, we were able to bring together a host of partners from both private sector as well as the multilateral institutions such as the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank here in Washington, D.C., as well as civil society, academia, and others. And this allowed us to address Secretary Clinton's critical question or idea when she came up with the AMP, was how can we address development needs, climate change being one of them, in an area of diminishing government resources. Taxpayers around the world will not want to foot the bill 30 years out to keep funding projects for development. And there's a keen opportunity here to bring in the private sector to help address these issues. And that's really the genesis of AMP and the idea of accelerating the market-driven partnerships that we could use to address climate change and other problems.
Your partners give you the opportunity to have huge impact at real scale. Can you give us some examples of the opportunities you see using your program to actually move the needle?
Certainly. One of the things that we're particularly keen to look at are disruptions in markets. Now, these could be generated either through policies or they could be generated through economic crises, for example, and also through technologies. So one big disruption that we see right now is the plummeting cost of solar. Look at another technology coming into that, which is the ability to start to pay for stuff on your cell phones. Well, in rural African villages, where some people pay dollars per kilowatt, not kilowatt cents per hour, but dollars per kilowatt, there's a tremendous opportunity to develop financial models that could allow people on the bottom rung of the income tier and pretty much on the poverty level to get less expensive energy into their homes that's more reliable and more affordable over the long term. And that's a particular disruption that we're really interested in, that we're developing financial models for to help be able to address.
There are a lot of examples, I'm sure, of things that are going on in the world that you can address. That's a great example. You and I offline talked a little bit about an opportunity drawn from Scandinavia. Can you tell us a little bit about the opportunity you see there to mimic some of what's going on there?
Sure. There's a great opportunity that's been around for 40 years that we really don't think about, and quite frankly, most Americans don't understand because it's nothing that we put emphasis on, and that's geothermal technology. Now, this isn't having a geyser underneath your home and tapping into it. This is actually drilling into local well water underneath your house and using that to accumulate energy that could heat your home. It's that simple. And this technology has been proven in Scandinavia and Switzerland for decades, some places 40 and 50 years. Now, this just isn't implemented in the United States because we've had historically very inexpensive energy, and as the American consumer knows, prices have gone up lately. And through that shift in the market, there's actually quite an opportunity to develop financing mechanisms that would allow people to get geothermal into their homes. Some part of it is a shift in the marketplace, but another big part is awareness. And that's something that we hope to address here at AMP.
It seems like that has the potential to have the same kind of impact that solar does, especially in northern regions of the United States.
It turns out that in the United States, home use, building use, writ large, contributes to the lion's share of the energy consumed off the grid. And with geothermal technology, that could lower the amount of resources that are required to heat one's home from an electric perspective. And that particular opportunity is something that could be expanded throughout the region, even in parts of California. It actually gets quite cold up in the mountains. There's opportunities there to address heating needs through geothermal. But like you said, the northern states, great opportunities, great incentives that are already out there actually through the federal tax credits. It's just a matter of creating the education, in some cases, getting loan officers at banks comfortable with these, right? We start to buy the things that people present to us, and if we're not aware of it as a consumer, it's a lot harder to get the momentum going and hit the scale that we've seen, for example, with solar providers in Arizona, California, New Mexico, and even Vermont.
The falling price of solar seems to create another opportunity. How do you see the Aspen Institute and your project helping to move the needle forward and move the action forward on solar power?
So within the United States, there's already been tremendous work done there. Danny Kennedy at Sungevity, for example, has come up with a great model to hit scale for the American consumer. There's some experts out there, such as the Rocky Mountain Institute's Amory Levins, that argue that in a matter of years, it'll be at the point where it's going to be less expensive to have solar on our house than it is to pay the utilities. And in some cases, we might even see providers paying the consumer to put solar on the roof of their house. Now, if we think about more challenged markets, like I mentioned earlier in sub-Saharan Africa, there are opportunities there where we feel, through our connections with development institutions as well as the State Department, that we're able to identify clear market opportunities to start to shape markets. Now, yes, these will be profit generating activities that we'll be focusing on, but in order to kickstart it, just as the federal government backs mortgages here in the United States, it's important to have some forward-thinking models and perhaps even some philanthropic capital. One of our supporters is the Rockefeller Foundation, in order to generate the idea and kickstart the actual process so that low-income people can have the access to energy that we're afforded here in the West.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm Devin Thorpe, your host, and excited to have with us today. Wow. We're doing the show for Forbes today because I'm a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneur. Sometimes technology's not our friend. I apologize for that disruption. So where do we go from here? As you look out into the future, do you see an opportunity for us to really get our hands around global warming issues, the carbon release? Can we get that down to a level that would be acceptable in time to prevent some of the worst outcomes that are feared?
So I'm personally an optimist, and while technology can't fix all of our problems, technology thoughtfully invested in, coupled with policy, does have that opportunity to hit along your theme of 30 years out. If we look, for example, at how the EPA regulates iPhones, well, they just can't keep up with how fast technology is moving. So there is a role for industry and the financiers behind it to help shape that process, because policy just can't keep up in these high-tech areas at the rate they'd like to. And I think that that's really the opportunity we're most focused on, is where are the disruptions? We see a plummeting cost of solar. We see the awareness of geothermal, two concrete examples where things are shifting. There will be others as we move forward. If we think back to 1984, no one would have guessed that people in the highlands of Kenya would be trading goods and services with minutes on their cell phones. Inconceivable. But that is a significant market disruption that has allowed social transformation for the better. It's allowed the poorest of the poor to enter the financial system. And analogously, there will be disruptions in the systems that could affect climate change moving forward over the next 10, 15, 20, even 30 years. And by being on the forefront of that, with the connectivity we have here at the Aspen Institute and our partners and our resources, we feel that we could have a significant role to play to help mitigate. By no means is the problem solved. By no means is our work going to solve for more than a small fraction of this. But we could help move the needle forward in a way that could create awareness and generate the catalytic capacity needed to help address the climate crisis.
One of the things that many people fear, especially those who are enjoying our modern lifestyle, is that ending global warming will require huge sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address that concern?
I think that is a completely legitimate concern, and I understand where that's coming from. But if you start to look at the hard numbers, it's not a zero-sum game. We could benefit, people in the developing world could benefit, and we could have stronger, smarter cities. So let's take the example of solar, rooftop solar in California. Right? As I said earlier, here's an opportunity where it's actually cheaper in some cases to put solar on your house than it is to pay the utility. Win-win for everybody. The consumer pays less, which no matter what political persuasion you're from, that's a benefit. No one's going to argue with that. And we're able to create jobs here in the United States. People are installing that solar. So here's a great example that we all could touch and feel today. You can see it on a lot of houses, probably in the neighborhoods where a lot of our viewers are watching today, where there's rooftop solar and the consumer's paying less for it. There is sacrifices that have to be made in our thinking, but in our actual pocketbook, it's probably going to work out better. Take, for example, the volatility in the prices of petroleum and fossil fuels. There's quite a bit of volatility and uncertainty there. Any business leader I talk to, they would much rather have a stable amount of payback. They knew they have to pay over 10, 15, 20, or 30 years and be able to model for it so they could calculate their budgets annually. When we think about renewable technologies, there's often that opportunity there. When we look at traditional fossil fuels, we don't have that same stability. So I would argue that while we have some thinking to grapple with in the short term, over the long term, businesses and consumers will be better off as we embrace new technologies that can help transform the way we engage the world and address our climate crisis.
Yeah, so ultimately, you don't see us going back to a day and age where we're all riding our bicycles to work.
By no means. If we look at technologies, for example, with plug-in electric vehicles, there are efforts being made right now on the private sector side within California, Hawaii, and New Mexico, for example, where people are developing technology for, not technology, but developing the infrastructure so that people could have free charging stations for their cars. We're building out that network. We're allowing access to the grid, and believe it or not, even though the grid might burn some coal, you're still going to actually have a lower carbon impact with an electric car than you will with a traditional fossil fuel car throughout the United States. So we'll be able to have great technologies that are comfortable. Look at Tesla luxury vehicles, for example, that will allow people to have all the comfort and modern amenities and still be able to thoughtfully address climate change. It's really a question of how do we think about shaping the markets both from a consumer perspective, from the financial perspective, and ultimately from the policy perspective, so that we could have a safer and cleaner tomorrow.
Well, Robert, before we wrap up, tell us how you would like our listeners, our viewers, to engage with you. What do you hope people will do in order to advance the cause with you as a partner?
So with us as a partner at the Aspen Institute, definitely sign on to our newsletter. Keep aware of the events as they unfold with climate change. We obviously urge you to support thoughtful, intelligent policies that will address climate change, and also from business owners that are out there. Link up with us, engage in our conversation, because we want to hear from you as we're looking both in Africa as well as domestically, as well as in our conversations with the State Department and the World Bank of what your needs are, so that we could better understand the business perspective and civil society perspective, so that we could shape the markets and financial models that will best serve everyone's needs.
Well, Robert, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and I hope we can get you to come back at some point in the future to get a report on your progress, because I see the potential for you to have massive impact on the world and be from the chair you're sitting in, and I look forward to getting those reports.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Devin. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to the book when it comes out.
Well, thank you very much, and let's do some good.
Absolutely.